very short reading if you're interested in that. But and they gave me the choice of being interviewed by somebody, and gave me lots of choices. And I decided I would rather just answer questions from you guys. I will start out with just a little bit of background. I'm Connie Willis. I write science fiction. I've written science fiction since the late Cretaceous, and they now point to me on panels. I'll say, okay, we need to have some background. What was it like back in the Victorian era, Connie? You know, I'm happy to explain. So it gives me a different perspective on things from some of the younger writers just setting out. And although I know many things about what these people's careers are going to be like, I do not tell them because I do not wish to discourage them. And no one told me, and I probably would have quit if they told me, so we'll leave it like that. I usually write, people always ask me what I write. I write lots of different kinds of things because I have never liked, I hate the whole branding thing, you know, where you write one dragon story and then have to write dragon stories the rest of your life. And the publishers love that. They want you to have a simple brand that they know how to pitch. And I am constantly being hassled by my publishers. Can't you just do something, you know, the same, a little different? No. Because that would be boring to me. I have, however, written over the years a number of time travel stories which all center on Oxford and the Oxford historians who have gained access to time travel in order to travel to the real past and see history on sight. And something always goes wrong. I don't know why anybody would volunteer to go to the past in Oxford because something inevitably goes wrong. But that means I've been able to indulge my love of certain periods of history. I don't love all periods of history equally, and although I wrote Doomsday Book, I absolutely despise the Middle Ages. I don't think they were a good place at all, not somewhere I would want to go, not something I would want to see, but fascinating, of course. And my favorite period of history, it's kind of a close call between Victorian England, which I adore, and the London Blitz. And so I've done books, To Say Nothing of the Dog is set in Victorian England. Blackout, All Clear, which is a 2-volume novel, is set in the war in London, not just the Blitz, the Intelligence War, Dunkirk, Bletchley Park, all kinds of different places in the war. And I'm currently, I went to Tintern Abbey last summer in Wales, which is famous primarily because Wordsworth went there and wrote a poem about it. And his sister Dorothy then went there on his second trip and sat in a niche in Tintern Abbey waiting for the moon to rise, trying to absorb the fully romantic aura of Tintern Abbey, which is pretty darn romantic, I will say. The only bad thing is that they have taken the ivy down because, you know, ivy is bad. It eats stone. And so you can't, the National Trust doesn't, they would like to have Tintern Abbey continue to be there, so they have taken it down. But I feel so bad because it was so pretty when it had the ivy on it, and it's the ivy-draped Tintern Abbey that everybody wants to see, and the one that Wordsworth saw. But I got really fascinated with the whole thing when we were there because I was reading about, not only did Wordsworth go there, but apparently all the Romantic poets went there. Robert Southey and Samuel Taylor Coleridge. And in fact, they got lost one night and nearly fell over a cliff, which would have been the end of their careers. We would never have, you know, Xanadu did Kubla Khan and all that. What I loved about it was the reason they got lost was because they were fighting, having a fight over their publishers. And I was like, oh, nothing changes. Writers are always complaining about their publishers, and if they don't stop, they'll fall over a cliff, you know. So that was reassuring to me in a certain way. And then I discovered that Charles Lamb had feuded with Robert Southey, and that Coleridge had had a big fight with Wordsworth, and that Tennyson was mad at all of them, and I was like, okay, this is good. This reminds me of home. So anyway, I got interested in that, and I'm currently working on a time travel story that will sort of center around Tintern Abbey. the Romantic poets, and maybe Beatrix Potter is in there somehow. She didn't go to Tintern Abbey, but Glastonbury is fairly, I don't mean that, Gloucester is fairly close. And she wrote her wonderful Taylor of Gloucester. She was on a trip there to visit family and heard the story of the tailor who, he had gotten sick. He was working on a big project, a coat for the mayor for a big event, and he got sick and couldn't finish it, and went home and terribly upset that he wasn't going to be able to finish it. And when he came back to the shop, it was magically done and ready to go, all except for one buttonhole which had not been finished. And pinned to the coat was "no more twist," meaning no more embroidery thread. And so she wrote her wonderful Taylor of Gloucester, which is set at Christmas in Gloucester, and has the mice doing the work for the tailor. Actually, it was the tailor's assistants who did it for him, but she was very struck by the romance of that whole idea. And of course, if you're not familiar with Beatrix Potter, or you assume that she just wrote kids' books and you shouldn't pay attention, she was actually one of the wonderful naturalists of the Victorian era. But because she was a woman, she wasn't allowed to pursue a naturalist's career. Well, because it was Victorian era, but also because she had the worst parents on the planet, bad parents. And so she took out all of her ability to draw and to reproduce the flora and fauna and all her study of the animals and the flowers of the time and stuff, and put them all into these charming, wonderful children's books, and which are treasured now by naturalists as well as by the kids reading. So I think Beatrix Potter might be in there. And then I was reading a book about Oxford, and thinking about the Inklings, and C.S. Lewis, and J.R. Tolkien, and I don't know, they may be in it too. So I'm not sure. I was like, I'm getting old. I should put all my favorite things in one book. Why not? Why not? So, and how many of you are Inklings fans? C.S. Lewis, Tolkien, Charles Williams? Anybody? See, that's the problem. The two most famous Inklings, of course, everybody knows, but the third one was Charles Williams, and he is so unknown that I had a big fight with a guy in Blackwell's bookshop in Oxford for not carrying any Charles Williams books. I was like, how can you not carry him? He's an Inkling. He was here in Oxford. What are you doing? And they were like, well, we've never really heard of him. I'm like, well, pay attention. And I think part of the problem is he's difficult. He's not, Tolkien has this wonderful storytelling ability, and you just pick it up and you're just swept away. And C.S. Lewis has one of the best prose styles, anybody. He's so clear, and he can explain things so well, and he can make such clear arguments. Williams, not so much. And I will admit that sometimes I'm reading a book by him, and I will, halfway through the page, I'll go, I have no idea what I just read. And I have to go back to the beginning of the page and start over. But he did these really unusual books, and I don't even know what to call them. Last night I was talking to a friend who is a big fan of Williams also, and I said, what would you call these books? And we were trying to devise a name and couldn't come up with it. But spiritual thrillers, they've been called. That's not really right. I don't know what to call it. Anyway, just as an example, one of them, War in Heaven, is about the Holy Grail being found in a small church in southern England. And then the forces of good and evil converge to try to grab it. So sort of Raiders of the Lost Ark. I think now, he was writing these in the 30s and 40s. If he had been writing them now, we're so much more used to this kind of idea, Raiders of the Lost Ark and all kinds of supernatural and all the things that we watch. So we're more used to these ideas. But another one of them, Descent into Hell, begins with a young woman coming face to face with her doppelganger. And if you know the legend of meeting yourself, if a person actually comes up to you, it means death. You're going to die. And so she starts seeing her doppelganger moving closer and closer to her and has no idea what that means. And and that's a book involved with martyrdom and saints being burned at the stake, and also a group in modern England putting on a play. I don't know how to describe these books. They're so completely different from anything else. My favorite is All Hallows Eve, and it begins with the heroine Lester, and she has, when the book opens, she is standing on Westminster Bridge, looking across the Thames at the plane that just crashed that she was on. And she is not actually in London, she is in the London of the dead, which coexists with the real London. Doesn't that sound great? It's a great, great book. And the books are hard to come by, even on news book sites and stuff. But they're well worth the effort, and I really recommend them to you. If you are an Inkling fan, I think you'll love them. Yes?
I just found a whole bunch on Amazon Kindle.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Perfect. That's great. So yes, Kindle has transformed our lives by making a lot of these books available to us. So that's great. So anyway, so that's what I've been working on. I just finished a new story about a mysterious bookshop, which will be in the Christmas issue of Asimov's for their anniversary. It's their 50th anniversary, I think, 40th anniversary, I'm not sure which anniversary, for Asimov's magazine. And I love mysterious bookshop stories. I've always wanted to write a mysterious bookshop story, so this is mine. So I just finished that. So, and then let's see, what else am I working on? I'm also working on, I love romantic comedies, and my new novel, Crosstalk, is a romantic comedy. And I get so frustrated because I'm such a fan of romantic comedies. And so I will watch or read anything that says romantic comedy on it in the vain hope that it will actually be a romantic comedy. And I would just like to say many Bothans die to bring you this information. I mean, I have watched so many horrible movies. And one of them was called Something Borrowed. Oh my God. And it was so terrible that the heroine and hero started out by, she was the best friend and maid of honor, and to her friend, and then she slept with the groom at the engagement party. Well, even though that's pretty awful, it's not an impossible beginning for a romantic comedy. You could actually make a decent romantic comedy out of it, but they did not. And at the end of it, my husband, who suffers through these things with me, said, he's so patient, he turned to me and said, the couple, they join hands and they kind of walk off into the sunset. And my husband said, thank goodness they got together. Now they can't ruin anyone else's lives. And I was like, this is not actually the correct response for a romantic comedy. So I frequently find myself in the position of Joe DiMaggio, who famously said one day, can't anybody play this game? So I decided that in addition to writing a lot of romantic comedies, which I love, I would also try to write a book about writing romantic comedy and finally explain how it's done so that maybe someone else could possibly do it. And I don't want to be real negative. I should say I have, through all of these horrible experiences, found some great romantic comedies, if you are a romantic comedy fan. Grabbers, any of you heard of this? Irish film won the BAFTA Award, Irish BAFTA Award a couple years ago. It's a horror movie with romantic comedy in it. Wonderful movie. Sleeping with Other People, which has Alison Brie in it, who's one of my favorite actresses. That is probably the best romantic comedy I've seen in years. And it was one that totally surprised me because the couple meets outside. They had both been attending a sexual addiction therapy session, which is not a real promising, beginning for romantic comedy. It is a great movie. It follows all the rules. And then, of course, the Brits, really know how to do this. I don't know what's wrong with the Americans, but the Brits really know how to do it. And there's one with David Tennant called Decoy Bride, which is terrific. And I think Kelly MacDonald is in that too. And then of course there's, all the Hugh Grant stuff and Notting Hill and Love Actually and all those things. And Wimbledon, they seem to have a real gift for knowing how to do it. And then there's one that you may not have heard of that the Brits did a while back called Jack and Sarah, which I happen to know about because I saw it when I was in England, because all of the tubes were plastered with, advertisements for it. So I went and saw it, and it was a great romantic comedy. You're smiling, so you've seen it. Yeah, it's great, isn't it? Yeah, it's great. So anyway, it's a difficult art form, and it's one that's people don't understand. And George Martin said to me one day, he said, I don't get it, because they're romances with jokes. And I'm like, they are not romances with jokes. And they are not. Romance is like the opposite of romantic comedy. They're two completely different animals. And so we had quite a conversation about that, which my do not slap anyone was sorely tested, because George doesn't always listen to anybody. So that's what I'm working on right now. So as I grow older, the impulse to want to write down, my Clarion students are always asking me, are you going to write a book about writing? And so I have I've been working on some pieces about foreshadowing and plotting, and who knows, we'll see if it develops into a book, or if I keel over first, we'll see. I don't want it to take away from the time that I spend with my writing, but I do think that I do get frustrated when I see people, can't anybody play this game? I just get so annoyed. When you love something, you really want it to be good, and I am sick and tired of watching these terrible romantic comedies. That's what it really comes down to. So, and people handing me things. Somebody gave me a romance the other day, and they said, you'll love this. It's a romantic comedy, and it's part of their new Harlequin romantic comedy line or something. And I thought, well, okay, maybe, okay, no. It was romance. It wasn't romantic comedy. They're different things. So anyway, yes?
And how would you define a romantic comedy?
Well, I think a romantic comedy, first of all, is to me, it's the most adult relationship that you find in fiction. Jane Austen writes romantic comedies. The reason it's different from romance is usually about a seducer and a seducee, or a wooer and a wooee. And with romantic comedy, the two partners are completely equal. And they basically spend the entire time in the story working out the negotiations of how to be completely equal and how to form a working relationship. And they can do it in a lot of different ways, and they can do it in a lot of different genres, which is why the definition gets scrambled, because like Han Solo and Leia's relationship in Star Wars is a romantic comedy, but you wouldn't call those movies a romantic comedy because it's a secondary kind of plot. And the same is true for Raiders of the Lost Ark. So a lot of times you will find it in an adventure movie, or in a horror movie, like in Grabbers, or along with some other kind of story that's being told. But the part of the signs are the people see through each other. They're not fooled by the facades. They're not interested in the trappings of romance. So whenever you see roses and weddings and beautiful cars and things, that's not the right person. That's the wrong person usually. They're not interested in the trappings of romance, and many of them are anti-romance. In a romantic comedy, if somebody gives somebody a ring, it's going to be like an onion ring or a cigar band or something. It's not going to be a traditional ring. And the people are these are just a few of the things, but they also, love is not the highest value in a romantic comedy. You would think that it would be. It is in romance and in operatic dramas, like English Patience, The World Well Lost for Love. Who cares if you betray your country? Love is what's important. But the lovers don't feel that way. They have higher obligations. Family can be a higher obligation, or for instance, in Roman Holiday, which is a classic romantic comedy, she's going to be queen. They can't get together, but they can love each other. And people are very honorable. They have very honorable intentions, and they prove their love for each other by usually self-sacrifice. and they love the other person more than they love themselves and their own well-being. So those are just a few of the things, but they really make it. Shakespeare invented the form, you know, and he's written some of the best romantic comedies there are. They still work today, and many people, when they remake them all the time. 10 Things I Hate About You was actually Taming of the Shrew, and Clueless was Emma, that's Jane Austen, and Much Ado About Nothing was just remade. And so was Twelfth Night, I think, with Amanda Bynes or something. So there are stories that work after all these years and are some of my favorites. And I don't always do romantic comedy, but if I write relationships between people, they're usually romantic comedy type relationships, even in stories that's not the central action. So. And that was a terrible answer, I'm sorry. Man, this is why I have to write it down. I'm no good at talking, I'm just good at writing. Yes?
What is it about Victorian that appeals to you, considering that in a lot of ways it was very much like Middle Ages, just very good manners?
It was totally different from Middle Ages, except for the plumbing. The plumbing was equally bad. In fact, that my rule about time travel, if we had it, I would refuse to go back to any place preceding indoor plumbing. That's my bottom line. And I think all of you should think seriously about going to a place where there's indoor plumbing. Or vaccines. I think maybe 1940 with the advent of penicillin. It's a good dividing line. So you don't want to go back. I grew up on a lot of, any kid who was reading at the time I was reading is going to be reading lots of Victorian stuff. And what I didn't know was Victorian. I called them long dress books because the girls wore long dresses. And I loved all those books. And I love the Victorian novel. I think Dickens is a wonderful writer and has many romantic comedies within his novels. I love the fact that I feel the Victorian era was very much like ours right now. Everybody thinks of it as a very staid, sort of settled time, and that is not true. They were facing these enormous upheavals, the coming of the train, the coming of the Industrial Revolution. Everything everybody had known for centuries was kind of out the window. You had all these new interlopers coming in where you used to know everybody in the village, and now suddenly there's these upstarts and strangers coming in. It was a really difficult time, and the people were meeting it with great silliness. Their responses were all totally silly, and so I love that whenever people are at their silliest. And so it's just always been one of my favorites. It was very interesting when I wrote Doomsday Book. I knew almost nothing about the Middle Ages. I knew about the plague, but not much about the Middle Ages, so I had to start all my research from scratch. When I was writing To Say Nothing of the Dog in Victorian England, I had to look up the rules for croquet. That was pretty much it. I already knew all this stuff because I was so steeped in it, from the time I was a kid. And Victorian novelists are still many of my favorite writers. Yeah.
A lot of your characters always, they have like this really important objective they're trying to accomplish, but they keep getting interrupted in accomplishing that by all these people with their trivialities that keep interrupting.
Correct.
Reflect your own experience.
Yes, he's asking, he said my characters have big objectives to accomplish, but they keep getting interrupted by trivialities. You're kidding, right? This is life. This is what happens to everybody all the time. I mean, we are constantly, almost all of my characters are people who are facing a job that they are completely ill-equipped for, and one that problems they don't know how to solve, problems that either no one has ever had to solve before, or else, really they need somebody much more experienced and accomplished than they are. And they're stuck in these situations, and they can't get on with it because, as you say, there are constant interruptions in their lives. And I consider that the human condition. I mean, that's pretty much my life. I don't know about you guys, but I always feel like I'm in over my head and that somebody much more accomplished should be handling this situation than me. Jerry Garcia said something about we are in charge, God help us. and he said it's really pathetic that we're facing such terrible problems and that the only people who can solve it are us. And that's how I feel. I mean, I think that's true of every generation. I'm never interested in, it's kind of interesting to be at Wondercon where there's so much emphasis on the superheroes, you know, and heroines of the comic books they are so accomplished and they have either special skills or they have special powers and they're really the right person for the job, you know, except maybe Spider-Man, but who suffers from many of the same problems as everybody else, and who is therefore my favorite comic character of all time. But you know, I think in real life we are constantly facing situations that we really, you know, they're coming at us like a steam train, and we are not equipped to handle this, and yet somehow we have to handle that. And I always, that kind of heroism really fascinates me much more than the superhero who's totally in charge, you know, knows what to do, or the expert, the James Bond kind of character who's so good at all this and knows how to use all these weapons and knows exactly what to do. I watched Bridge of Spies not too long ago, a really good movie about the Cold War. And Tom Hanks plays what's supposed to be this person who's that person. He's an insurance lawyer who ends up defending a spy and then getting involved in a spy exchange and all these things but he's so good. And through the whole thing, I was like, wow, he really is a superhero because he knows exactly what to do. I would just be floundering in all the situations that he was in. And I really loved the movie, but would never write about that character. Would write about the flounderer instead, I think. So, because that seems to be what happens to me. And I think also one of the things that I didn't like about science fiction when I got into the field was how many stories did not seem to take place in the real world. And I don't mean by that they took place on Mars or a space station or something. I mean, the ordinary junk of life never seemed to enter in. You know, there was never an unexpected pregnancy, or you had to do your homework, or my favorite moment in Galaxy Quest when the mother is making the kid take off the trash. And he's trying to save the world. And he's going, Mom, you do not appreciate the seriousness of this situation. And she's like, well, take the trash out anyway. So, and I feel like that's the real world that I, really wanted to see. And one of the writers, I talked yesterday about Heinlein and how much I loved Heinlein. And the reason I loved him is because that's what he did. You had to do your homework. You were trying to save the world, but you were stuck with this little kid who was really annoying, and she was tagging along. Or you were trying to do something, but there were other things interfering. Real life kept interfering, and I think that's something that we all experience all the time. So, yeah, yes.
2 things. First, a comment. I once anonymously left a copy of Bellwether on a boss's desk. She didn't get it. What? She didn't get it.
Was she guilty of? Was she in Bellwether? That would be the problem. Yeah.
And I was wondering if you could comment on favorite sources for historic research.
Oh, okay. Well, that's so specific from book to book, One of the things I discovered when I wrote Firewatch was the first thing I wrote that was set in World War II. And I didn't really intend to write anything else. And then there was all this great research that I couldn't use in the story, and I wanted to use it in something. And so I got interested in it. But at that time, I was in Blackwell's. This was after the fight with the guy in Blackwell's. And they had this book that was the MO Diaries, which I had not known existed. They are the most fascinating things in the world. in England in the 1930s, for some unknown bureaucratic reason, the government decided they wanted to know what the people were thinking. And so their way of approaching this was to issue people notebooks and pay them a shilling if they filled up the notebook with their observations on life and their activities, kind of a diary, just kept a diary. And they gave them out to people in all different walks of life, all different, classes and everything. And I don't know really what they thought they were going to gain by this or what they originally intended, but whatever it was, they forgot to tell them to stop when the war started. So suddenly, instead of this little waitress at Lyons Corner House, who's just been keeping a diary about her life, she's now suddenly, a canteen worker down in the tube station, or she's joined an anti-aircraft group or something. And so usually in a war, the people who write about it are people who would already have been writing about it. They're either reporters or they're writers or they're the upper class who have time to, keep a diary. But here suddenly you have this workman who finds himself as a member of, a bomb squad and recording their experiences. So it's just this, and there's volumes and volumes of them. I've never read all of them, but I've read several where they were collected, into smaller pieces. And they are just an endless source of real life and how people react, and they're so different from what you would expect. The other thing I love to do is to go through, and sadly we're losing this all the time. As more and more stuff goes online, the libraries, college libraries are getting rid of their old bound magazines. And this is, I think, a tragedy because what is usually they just transfer the text. They don't transfer the ads, and the little squibs at the ends of the stories and all the different things that go with it. And so you lose a lot of that color. So but I love going through when I was writing Blackout Not Clear, I read the Time magazine for 1940s from cover to cover. Because, for one thing, you're getting it as it happens, not as it looks, looking back. And when they didn't know what was going to happen next, which is really, really important. And then also just what they were interested in, what movies they were seeing, what things were happening to them. What was the most popular movie in Britain through the entire war? I'll give you a clue. It's an American movie. What? Nope. No. These are good guesses. Gone with the Wind. Because they were experiencing annihilation themselves. Yeah, I was really shocked by that. That really surprised me. I would never have picked that. I would have picked one of these others. But Casablanca didn't actually become very famous until way after the war. So, yeah.
Where did Mrs. Miniver write?
Mrs. Miniver was a very popular movie, yes. And it had been a book. It had actually been a book in England before it was a movie. But no, Gone with the Wind was #1. And people didn't actually like reading about the war that much. Down in the tube shelters, they frequently had little lending libraries. And the most popular books were Agatha Christie's mysteries. And although they're not, lighthearted, although she's a very funny writer, they said they thought people liked the fact that justice was done, the bad guys were brought to justice and the equilibrium was returned. And also that they liked reading about the ordinary things of their lives, the tea parties and the murders, yeah. But anyway, those are some of the kinds of things I like to use. The magazines are great. They're just wonderful. Newspapers are okay, but magazines are where you get all the other stuff that's going on in people's lives and everything. So, yes.
You mentioned when you started writing the Domesday book, you knew very little about the Middle Ages, but some of your other books, like particularly one set in the Victorian period, you knew a lot. Do you find that you enjoy one more than the other? Like, does knowing too much about a period make you double think yourself or constrain when you're writing, or is it not that much difference when you're actually writing a book?
It's not that different. I don't, he asked if it was different writing about a period I knew too much about and one that I didn't know anything about. The one you know very little about, you know, there's just such a huge volume of stuff you have to find. With Doomsday Book, I found at the beginning, I couldn't even figure out what the plot would be because I couldn't, like, okay, I need her to talk to the priest. Could she talk to the priest? Could a girl talk to the priest back in those days? Where would she talk to him? Would he have been in a house? Would she have gone to the church? Was it appropriate for her to go to the church and talk to him? When would it have been appropriate for her to go to the church and talk to him? You can't write a scene unless you know something about where they could get together and talk. And then, so there was all that stuff to do and trying to figure out what the manner would be like, what they were eating and when they were eating and what the rooms looked like and all those things. But then when I got into the story, oh my God, there were all these details that you wish there was some massive index somewhere that would tell you these things. Like there's a chapter where she's dressing the little girls to go out on a winter day, and so what are they wearing? Are they wearing mittens? This is before most knitting existed. Are they going to be rabbit skin mittens? Are they going to be gloves? What are they going to look like? Would it be just a muff? When did the muff come in? And just all endless. And you can look through hundreds of volumes of things and not find that. You know, there is no index that lists what little girls wore as a whole. You know, and so that's maddening. But I think that really the hardest kind of research is what I call, I don't call that, Nabokov calls it the bones of the story. Finding the research that is going to be the key pieces that illuminate your story. And for me in Doomsday Book, it was when I read thousands of things about the Middle Ages. But I read that the bells were, you know, the bell in the village served all kinds of purposes in the Middle Ages. It wasn't just for ringing people to come to church. It was, you told funerals. If someone died, they told 9 strokes for a man, 3 strokes for a woman, 1 stroke for a child, and then an hour of tolling to pass them on to eternity. And then they also told if there was an army approaching, you told the bells to warn everybody. If there was a fire, same thing. It was kind of a combination fire bell and, you know, sirens. If somebody got lost in the woods, they would toll the bells all night long to serve as sort of a directional finder, GPS for a person to find their way home. So it served all these different, you know, functions in the village. And I read that when the plague started in England, and for some reason, it didn't come across from Europe. You would think it would come across the channel, but it didn't. It came in boats around to like Portsmouth and then southwest to England. And as it did, the people in the village could hear it coming because they would hear the village to the northwest, and it would be tolling a funeral, and then the next day, 3 funerals. And then the next day, so many funerals that there were just nonstop tolling, and then nothing. But in the meantime, this village, and this village, and this village would start tolling also. And they knew something horrible was coming, and they had no idea. And when I read that, a chill went through me, and I thought, it's the bells that are the secret to this book. They are the secret bones of this book. And then went out of my way to put in as many bells as I possibly could. As many places. I had bell ringers taken from my own church, hand bell ringers. And then I had the traditional people who toll actual chimes ringing. And as many bells as I could think of, I put in that book to help me with the theme of the bells. Yeah. It's an amazing, I mean, I can't think of anything that would be like it. I guess if you turn on text alerts, and then silent, I guess, and then all the phones going dead. I just watched a little Australian movie called Tomorrow When the War Began. I don't know if any of you have seen it. It's a great little movie about teenagers who go off for a summer weekend thing into the wilderness, and then when they come back, something really bad has happened, and they can't figure out what. But the first thing they do is all get on their phones, and the phones are all dead, and then they turn on the television, and the television isn't working, and then, and it's sort of similar, but I don't think there's any one thing that we have in our society that would be such a symbol of something is so wrong as those bells were in that time.
Twitter.
Yeah.
There's stories of first responders to mass shootings, like the Orlando shooting. They walked into the building and all they heard was the cell phones going off.
All they heard was what? Cell phones, right.
Of people trying to get a hold of.
Right. Right, that's probably the closest thing, yeah. And I know when 911 happened, it was, the endless, that people trying to get through, and all the messages people were trying to send, and people who couldn't get through. So, I was talking yesterday about how technology is amoral. It's not good or bad, it's how we use it. And it always has blessings, and then it always has these horrible costs to it that we are usually not aware of at front. And of course, one of the terrible costs, is that you could be on the phone with someone as they died. I guess that's a blessing and a curse, both. But it's certainly something that didn't happen before. And we can also watch people die. And that's something we haven't had before, and we'll have to learn to somehow live with it. I'm always amazed by technology and how it is this double-edged sword, always. And I get so annoyed, and I hang around science fiction conventions, of course, with a lot of dewy-eyed optimists who are always guys. I don't know what's the matter with them. And they are always saying, not that all guys are dewy-eyed optimists, but if there are dewy-eyed optimists, they're guys. And they're always like, it's going to be so cool. We're all going to live forever. We're going to get immortality. We're going to get telepathy. We're going to live forever. It's going to be great. And you're like, really? Not so much. You need to think a little harder about this. And then when you try to mention various things that could go wrong with this scenario, then you're just so negative, so negative. I'm like, this time it's not going to have any side effects. I'm like, when is the last time we had a brand new technology that did not have any side effects? Think about it, people. So it's, kind of fascinating. But what I did, my new book is called Crosstalk, and it's about telepathy. And what a terrible idea telepathy would be. Really, do you want somebody listening to your thoughts? No. Do you want to listen to anyone else's thoughts? No, you don't. For one thing, you would be bored to tears at all times. And secondly, it's a cesspool out there. If you think it's bad being online with those commenters, just think of that all day in your head, unfiltered. And yet, I was talking to a guy from Wired who was saying, oh no, it's going to be great, we're going to all be telepathic, it's going to be wonderful, just think how many things we can do. I'm like,
It's going to be all shut up, shut up, shut up, shut up.
that's what that will be the first thing we'll do. He said, what do you think will be the first thing we'll do with telepathy? I said, we will try to figure out a way to block it, obviously. My God. So, yeah, I always find that fascinating. And of course, as a science fiction writer, you're kind of skewed that way anyway. Ed Bryant came up with the best definition of science fiction I've ever heard. He said, in 1885, any fool could have predicted the coming of the automobile. All of the pieces of the technology were there, the early versions were there, it was time for the automobile. He said it would have taken a real visionary to predict the interstate highway system. But it would have taken a science fiction writer to predict the traffic jam. And I always thought that was a pretty good definition of science fiction. We're there to predict those traffic jams that come from this shiny new, exciting technology. I remember when the fax machine was brand new, and everybody thought this was so wonderful. And then people started ordering pizzas on it and taking pictures of their rear ends and sending those out. And it was just like, okay, this wasn't maybe that great an idea, But you know, so there are always blessings and curses that go with all of it. And science fiction has been very good at figuring out what those are. Yeah.
In defense of the optimists, as a reader for 50 years, I find that modern age, well, like when I discovered your writing through the time travel books, and within 5 minutes, I had everything else you published.
Well, I love the information society in many ways.
Is there anything like that comparable for the writer end of that, where 50 years ago or 30 years ago writing, it was difficult to do whatever, and now
The question is it easier are there things that the information age has blessed the writer with? Well, I would say, I can remember the days of workshop where we had to make carbon copies of our stories to pass around to everyone in the workshop, and the poor person who got that fourth carbon, you couldn't read it on the wall. It was really sad. And of course you had to mail them, and it took forever and all that. And now, of course, everybody just emails everything to you, and you don't get manuscripts that are lost in the mail, so there's all that kind of stuff. As far as like research, it's easier, much easier for me to order books on. I spend all my time on ad books, you know. But as far as researching online, everyone always says, I bet you love the internet now because you can research online. The internet is useless. It's terrible. You will look up something. When I was writing Blackout and All Clear, and I got to the part about Selfridges being bombed, the department store in London. And I couldn't remember. I had read it before. I knew it had been bombed. I just couldn't remember which floor was damaged. Only part of it was damaged. 6th floor and the Palm Court restaurant, just for your information. But I couldn't remember that. So I thought, I'll just look it up on the internet. So I typed in Selfridges bombed. And I got all these things of Selfridges summer sales bomb. And I'm like, no, wait, okay, Selfridges World War II bombed. And then I got historical sales announcements. And then I went, okay, let's see, Selfridges, it's like playing a game of Open Sesame where you're trying to figure out the correct words that we get. Sesame, let's see, Selfridges bomb damage, Blitz, 1940. And then I got a thing of Selfridges new summer sales blitz. And I'm like, oh no. So then I gave up, and I went and looked it up in the book where I'd originally found it, and I was done and thought. But the problem is that the internet is like 1,000,000 miles wide and about 1 inch deep. And so you'll think there are 100,000 sources for what you choose. Tintern Abbey. I look up Tintern Abbey. There's all these, 100,000 entries. They're all based on 2 articles, one of them being the Wikipedia article. And they just don't go any deeper. So if you're looking for further information, you're going to have to still go to books. Or once everything is online with the Gutenberg project and everything, then maybe we'll be able to find it. But and the other thing that I hate about the information age is they have taken advantage of it to do computer-generated indexes, which simply go by appearance of the word and do not go by whether you're actually talking about that thing on that page. And that is one of the worst things that I've ever seen. I hate that. I wish they would go back to having actual people assemble the indexes. Because you can be talking about Tintern Abbey for pages and pages, but unless you say Tintern Abbey, it will not show up in the index anywhere if it's done by a computer and stuff. Now, the computers will get smarter also, and this will all be taken care of eventually. But you asked what I like. But mostly I love the computer because I can get on and waste hours and hours looking at politics, seeing what idiotic thing Trump has done, and how he's going to destroy the world before I can manage to finish my book, and stuff. And I love all that. So I do waste an enormous amount of time on Talking Points Memo, and Raw Story, and sites like that. And then that's very fun. And so it's generally a good thing. Yeah. Thank you. Right. Which is practically like, yeah, it's, well, one of the things that gave me the idea to write Crosstalk was I was on a panel about telepathy at a science fiction convention. And the moderator was this guy that I just despised. And so he was just massively annoying. And I was saying I did not think the idea of telepathy was good. We didn't want people to know what we were thinking. And he turned to me and said, "Oh, Connie, come on. When is the last time that you didn't say exactly what you thought?" And I thought, right now. And if you could read my mind, your head would be exploding. So that set me thinking about all the problems with our privacy and with social media, and with the fact that, it's really hard to, even if you could hear our thoughts, that would not really be a good guide to what we're thinking. I've been married for almost 50 years. I want to kill my husband about twice a day. It's a really sincere thought. The man has never picked up his socks in the entire time. But I don't really mean that. I certainly don't really want to kill him. And it certainly would not be a good basis by which to arrest people for murder. And so how do you tell? And, there have been moments when I have thought of someone, I love you. But that doesn't really mean I want a relationship with them. It's our thoughts aren't even reliable, and we're not used to censoring them in any way. We're used to feeling free to think anything. I can't even imagine a society in which we could read each other's thoughts, because then we'd have to be as careful about what we think as we are about what we say, and that would be an impossible task. So, yeah. What do we got? How much time do we have?
You got 2 minutes.
2 minutes? Okay, one more quick question. Yes.
Have you read Junot Diaz?
I'm sorry?
Have you read Junot Diaz?
No, I haven't. Junot Diaz? No.
Yeah, he's a science fiction writer, and he was my gateway to science fiction. I as a child, there are things that I consider science fiction, but this is the first time that I actually personally looked for science fiction, and it was my gateway.
Oh, good. Well, good. Well, the number of writers of science fiction that I have not read is huge. And when I got into the field, it was really small, and I could basically read everybody and keep up with everybody. The field has just exploded, and there are so many great writers out there. And I can't possibly keep up with them. So, recommendations. Okay, Nancy Kress does wonderful stuff. Beggars in Spain is probably her best book, but she does all kinds of interesting things. James Patrick Kelly, it's true that he's my best friend, but it's also true that he's probably the best writer of short stories in science fiction today. He's absolutely wonderful. Ted Chiang does terrific work. Let's see, Kat Rambo is doing some really interesting things. There are just so many people out there, and science fiction of all different kinds. So, yes, and I'm sorry. Yes, thank you so much. The next panel, much better attired than I am, is at the back of the hall here. So I can't stay and talk to you here, but I will be down in this A signing area. A, is that right? Signing area A, not A signing area. Signing area A.